There are ways to die in war that we can understand. A bullet is fast, a shell explosion is instant, but there is one weapon that triggers a primal fear in every human being, no matter how tough they are: fire. In Europe, the war was fought in cities and fields. You could see the enemy. But in the Pacific, against the Japanese Empire, the war was different. It was underground. The Japanese didn't fight on the beaches, they fought from inside the earth. They built caves, tunnels, and concrete bunkers that were invisible until you were standing right on top of them. You could pump 1,000 bullets into a cave entrance, and the enemy would just laugh. They were around the corner, deep in the dark, waiting for you to reload. So the Marines had to come up with a solution. They needed a weapon that could flow like water, burn like the sun. They needed the M2 Flamethrower. But here's the catch. To use it, you had to strap 2 tanks of highly explosive napalm to your back, walk within 20 yards of a machine gun nest, and pray you didn't get shot and explode. The life expectancy of a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima was measured in minutes. This is the story of the men who walked through hell to burn the enemy out. Welcome to Valor and Heritage. February 1945. The United States Navy arrives at an island that looks like a pork chop and smells like rotten eggs: Iwo Jima. The name literally means Sulfur Island. It was a volcanic rock in the middle of nowhere, but we needed it. It had airfields that could let our bombers reach Japan. But taking it was going to be a nightmare. The Japanese commander, General Kuribayashi, was a genius. He knew he couldn't win. He knew the American fleet was too strong. So he decided to make the Americans pay for every single inch of sand with blood. His order to his men was simple: no survivors. Kill 10 Americans before you die. When the Marines landed, they didn't hit a nice white sandy beach. They stepped into black volcanic ash. It was soft like coffee grounds. You tried to run and you sank up to your ankles. You tried to dig a foxhole and the walls collapsed on you. And the worst part? It was quiet. For the first hour, there was almost no fire. The beaches were crowded with men, tanks, and crates. It looked like a traffic jam. And that's exactly what Kuribayashi was waiting for. He waited until the beach was full, and then he opened the gates of hell. Artillery, mortars, and machine guns opened up from the mountain, but the Marines couldn't see where it was coming from. The Japanese were firing from slits in the ground that were only a few inches high. They had spider holes, trap doors where a sniper would pop up, shoot a Marine in the back, and disappear back into the earth before anyone could turn around. The Marines were pinned down. They couldn't move. Tanks were getting stuck in the sand. Officers were dying left and right. They realized that conventional weapons were useless. You can't shoot a bullet around a corner. They needed the specialists. They shouted for the Zippo men. Let's talk about the gear. The M2 Flamethrower was a beast. It consisted of 2 large tanks filled with thickened gasoline, napalm, and a smaller tank of compressed air to push the fuel out. It weighed 70 pounds. Imagine running across a soft sandy beach with a 70-pound refrigerator strapped to your back. And this wasn't just heavy, it was a bomb. If a bullet hit those tanks, you didn't just die, you turned into a human torch. You would incinerate everyone standing within 30 feet of you. Because of this, flamethrower operators were lonely men. Nobody wanted to dig a foxhole next to the guy with the gas tanks. The weapon had a range of about 20 to 40 yards. That's it. To use it, you had to get close, insanely close. You had to crawl under machine gun fire until you could practically smell the enemy. Then you pulled the trigger. The fuel would shoot out, pass through an ignition flame at the nozzle, and turn into a sticky, burning stream of liquid death. The psychological effect was devastating. The Japanese soldiers were disciplined. They would fight to the death against rifles. But fire? Fire broke them. When a flamethrower opened up, the Japanese would often panic. They would run out of the caves right into the waiting rifles of the other Marines. It was brutal. It was ugly, but it was the only way to clear the island. But the fuel only lasted for about 7 to 10 seconds of continuous fire. That's it. 7 seconds. You had to make every burst count. And once you were empty, you were just a guy with a heavy metal backpack standing in the open. We're about to meet the man who mastered this weapon, a quiet farm boy who became a destroyer of worlds. But first, if you respect the grit it took to fight in the Pacific, light up that subscribe button. We are documenting the toughest battles in history. Don't let the flame go out. Join us. Now, let's meet Woody. Herschel Woody Williams was a corporal from West Virginia. He was small, only 5'6". He had actually been rejected by the Marines at first for being too short, but he eventually got in. And on Iwo Jima, this little guy became a giant. His company was stuck at the airfield. There was a network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, bunkers that were tearing the Marines apart. Every time they moved, they got cut down. The tanks tried to blast them, but the concrete was too thick. Woody's commanding officer looked at him and said, "Do something." Woody strapped on his 70-pound flamethrower. He asked for 4 riflemen to cover him, and he went to work. For the next 4 hours, Woody Williams fought a one-man war. He crawled on his belly toward the first bunker. Bullets were bouncing off his fuel tanks. Can you imagine the sound? Ping, 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 knowing that one lucky shot turns you into a fireball. He got in range, he pulled the trigger. Whoosh! He fried the first pillbox. But he ran out of fuel. He had to run back to the rear, get a fresh tank, and go back out. He did this 5 times, running back, strapping on a new bomb, and running back into the machine gun fire. At one bunker, the Japanese saw him coming. They charged out with bayonets to kill him. Woody didn't flinch. He hit them with a burst of flame and stopped them in their tracks. At another bunker, he noticed smoke coming out of a vent pipe. He realized it was the air intake. Instead of attacking the front, he climbed on top of the bunker and shot the flame down the pipe. It killed everyone inside instantly. By the end of the afternoon, Woody Williams had single-handedly destroyed 7 pillboxes. He had cleared the path for the tanks. He collapsed from exhaustion. He didn't do it for a medal. He did it because his friends were dying. But for that day's work, President Truman would hang the Medal of Honor around his neck. While Woody was fighting on the ground, another group of Marines was fighting their way up Mount Suribachi, the volcano that overlooked the island. On February 23rd, they reached the top. They found a piece of pipe. They tied a small American flag to it, and they raised it. A few hours later, they replaced it with a bigger flag, the one from the famous photo. When that flag went up, the ships offshore blew their horns. The men on the beaches cheered. It was the first time an American flag had flown over Japanese territory. But the battle wasn't over. It went on for another month. By the time Iwo Jima was secured, nearly 7,000 Americans were dead. 20,000 were wounded. It was the only battle in the Pacific where the U.S. casualties, dead and wounded, outnumbered the Japanese defenders. Admiral Nimitz looked at the carnage and said the famous words, "Among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." Woody Williams lived a long life. He was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Pacific Theater until he passed away recently. He spent his life honoring the Gold Star families, the families who lost someone. He never forgot the smell of the sulfur or the heat of the flame. The flamethrower was a horrible weapon for a horrible war, but in the hands of men like Woody, it was the torch of liberty. If you enjoyed this trip into the fire, leave a comment, Uncommon Valor. Next time on Valor and Heritage, we're telling the story of the greatest sniper in American history, a guy who learned to shoot squirrels in Texas and ended up terrorizing the enemy in Vietnam. You know the legend. Chris Kyle is coming up. Semper Fi.